Have you ever wondered why getting stressed out can literally make your stomach hurt? Well, today we're going to unravel that fascinating and, for so many people, incredibly painful connection between what's going on in your head and what you feel in your gut. Let's dive right in. I mean, you know the feeling, right? You get some really bad news, or maybe you're staring down a huge deadline, and bam, suddenly your stomach is just tied in knots. It's a universal human experience, that physical punch to the gut when your brain is under pressure. But imagine if that feeling wasn't just a fleeting moment. For millions of people dealing with irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, that feeling is a daily reality. Stress isn't just an emotion. It's a direct, powerful trigger for very real physical pain. We're talking about a known physiological response here. This is not just in their head. So, how in the world does a thought or an emotion actually create a physical sensation of pain? Well, to figure that out, we have to follow the stress signal on its journey, all the way from the brain's command center down to the front lines in your gut. At the heart of this problem is a condition called visceral hypersensitivity. And that's a fancy term, but what it really means is that the nervous system in the gut is on high alert. So normal things like food digesting or gas moving through are perceived by the brain as a threat. It's like the volume on all the pain signals coming from the gut has been turned way, way up. So where does that signal to crank up the volume even come from? Well, as you probably guessed, it all kicks off in the brain. Let's trace this alarm signal right from the very beginning. Okay, so when your brain thinks there's a threat, and it doesn't matter if it's an actual tiger or just a really stressful email from your boss, it flips a switch on this ancient survival mechanism, the fight or flight response. Your heart starts racing, you get hyper-focused, your body is preparing for action. But this whole response is run by a very specific cascade of chemicals. And the undisputed star of that chemical show is a little something called corticotropin releasing factor, or CRF. The easiest way to think about CRF is as the brain's chief stress messenger. It's the molecule that sounds the alarm, the one that tells the entire body, okay, people, it's go time. So CRF kicks off this chain reaction, this sort of chain of command, known as the HPA axis. It's actually pretty straightforward. First, the brain senses stress and pumps out CRF. That CRF then talks to the pituitary gland, telling it to get to work. And then the pituitary gland signals the adrenal glands, telling them to release stress hormones like cortisol. It's a very precise, very powerful chemical domino effect. Now, here's where it gets really, really interesting for gut pain. That first messenger, CRF, it doesn't just hang out in the brain. No, it also sends signals directly down to the gut, essentially putting your digestive system on the front lines of the body's stress response. And when CRF gets to the gut, it starts giving out direct orders. It can actually increase the permeability of the intestinal wall. That's what people often call leaky gut. It also activates these special immune cells called mast cells, and those mast cells, in turn, release a flood of chemicals, like histamine. And what do those chemicals do? They directly sensitize the nerve endings right there in the gut. So you can see how this creates a really nasty, vicious cycle. The system doesn't just get one little ping that there's a problem. It gets stuck on high alert at two different levels, creating this painful, self-amplifying feedback loop. Okay, so the first level is what we call peripheral sensitization. Because of all those chemicals, like histamine that we just talked about, the nerve endings in the gut itself become hyper-responsive. It's kind of like turning the sensitivity way up on every single microphone in a room. All of a sudden, even the quietest little whisper, like your gut just doing its normal thing, sounds like a deafening shout. And that shout is perceived as pain. But it doesn't stop there. The second level is central sensitization. As all those super loud pain signals travel from the gut up the spinal cord to the brain, the central nervous system itself starts to change. It starts amplifying the signals even more. The brain basically goes, whoa, there must be a huge problem down there. And it turns the pain volume dial up to 11, making the pain feel even more intense and widespread. So if this whole thing is really a communication problem, a system of signals that's just gone completely haywire, how do we interrupt it? How do we calm the chaos? Well, thankfully, we do have ways to restore some peace to the system. Broadly speaking, you can think of it as two different paths to turn down the volume. First, there's the top-down approach. This uses mind-body therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness. The goal here is to change how the brain perceives stress in the first place, to stop that initial CRF alarm from blaring so loudly. Then you've got the bottom-up approach, which uses medications. These are designed to target the chemical signals themselves, like using certain antidepressants to calm the nerves down, or even developing new drugs that can specifically block those CRF receptors in the.
And this is why understanding this whole pathway is so important, so empowering. It takes the conversation from this vague idea of a tummy ache from stress to a precise biological mechanism we can actually point to. Knowing exactly how the brain's alarm sets off this physical chain of events is absolutely the most critical first step toward finding solutions that actually work.
So the link between your head and your gut isn't just a feeling. It's a detailed neurochemical pathway that we can trace step by step. And that leaves us with a really powerful and hopeful question. Now that we know exactly which wires are crossed and which signals are being amplified, can we finally learn how to turn the volume down on pain for good?